I don't see the share screen option. I think I'm not like admin or whatever.
Huh?
Present.
It's the bottom right.
Present now.
Yeah.
Right, because it's this is me, right? Yep. Let's see. I want to see share this screen. Let's go with screen 1. Okay. All right. So we have a screen shared. All right. So what we're let me log into servers here real quick.
I wish I could see your whole screen or all the things that you're doing. Okay, you are doing it here. So this way, I want to follow along what you're doing. Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to keep everything on one monitor here.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm doing here is just logging in. I have a special tool that lets me log in with my password once, and it stores a credential on my machine so that I don't have to. When I'm using SSH a lot of the day, so I don't have my password bookmarked or anything in the machine. So now, because I've initialized with this tool KInit, I can just do SSH web2 prod CSM go, and it will automatically log me in and pass my credential across. So I can just avoid the password step.
When you say avoid the password step, are you talking about for like when you do the root level or su commands for those?
No, I still have to enter password for those.
Oh.
That's a. We could bypass that, but I don't want to for security reasons.
Got it. Okay.
It's important that you know that you're elevating to root and you can do dangerous stuff. So making you put your password in is a good protection.
Got it.
And I probably do that more in a day than anybody else because I'm all the time elevating to root for various things. But yeah, it is important to note that even I log in with a regular account. I don't log in as root pretty much ever. Neither does Andy. So it's not.
Okay.
The fact that we're not sharing root passwords with people is not a personal thing with anybody. It's just we don't give those out. Not that they're locked away.
Got it.
Anyway. Okay.
So where I'd like to see us begin is, I'm assuming in our method, so we're talking about the directory. So essentially, I'm assuming you're gonna start with the controller file. Is that right? If you review a file or if you're gonna build something.
So we can definitely go through and look at that. Here, this is my display. So actually, I want to step to this real quick, just because it's something I've done before we jump to the directory. And the only thing I want to show you here is commenting of code. So the reason that I want to show you this is formatting, commenting, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Particularly, what I've been doing is I've been building a cron job.
Can you update your resolution just a little?
Sorry. Yep. Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, I'm on a higher screen, so everything's smaller. So what this is just a job that pulls down calls from Twilio, stores them in our database. Just fixing a problem we've been having. Anyway, so what you'll notice though is that I have blocks of code of comment above sections of code. So like this entire section here has a block above it talking about what this section of code does, right?
Okay.
And then we have comments on each line talking about not what the line does, but what it's supposed to do.
So what file is this? This is the user bin PHP file?
No. So this file is actually
that's the Twilio some sort of retrieve calls.
Oh, Twilio retrieve calls.php. Okay, I see it. I see it on the tab.
Under my JP dev, var www. In my it's under Jupyter in here, but some might have but this would be under var www Jupyter and
got it.
Once it goes out. And then in we have this file. So what this line at the top is, this is what they call a shebang line, because it's a combination of a hash and a bang, which is an exclamation point. In typography, they call it a bang.
Okay.
So it's a shebang line, which what that does is it tells the system, if you try to run this file, it tells it where the program is that processes that. So because this is a PHP script, what I do is I say which PHP. It tells me where PHP is on our servers, which is /user/bin/PHP.
Okay.
So I come in to here and I say shebang user bin PHP. Now instead of having to do something like call PHP-F to process the file or do curl to load the file over a web interface, I can now literally just run it directly. So you'll see this is good for cron jobs because
Yeah, typically I've been doing curl on the cron job, so you're saying this is a better way of doing it.
oh, this is a much better way because it doesn't require anything else. So on my dev server, if I go to where I have the file there, Jupyter cron, then what you'll see is all I did was I made this file executable here. So these X flags.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did was a chmod plus X on Twilio retrieve calls. And then that flags it with the plus X. You don't need to do something like 777. That's not the way you would do this, right?
Okay.
You just say, I want execute permission. So you say chmod plus X. So you say make it executable for everybody.
Okay, for everybody.
Anyway, so then when I do that, all I have to do now is to /Twilio retrieve calls in this folder, and I can just run it as though it's a program on the server. And it's talking to the API, and it's doing all this stuff that it's doing.
Got it.
And so here it's still in development, so we're seeing a lot of debug output that I haven't dumping. But this is a set of Twilio call records that come down from their API. So anyway, the point is that this is kind of the way we would build a cron. Right? Like we would build it as a script that can run directly on the server. And that way you run into fewer problems and you can do things with error processing. It becomes a much nicer interface for us.
Okay.
Anyway, so the main thing, though, is like, for example, comments is what I really wanted to focus on because there's not a lot of comments in our code.
Mm-hmm.
Comments can help us a lot. So like here I'm loading the SLO framework. Okay, so I have a comment about that. Here, this is just something weird with some function called getOpt. I don't really know what that does. I've got CLI params. I don't really know what it is.
So are you trying to, Jonathan, I'm sorry, I'm going to ask, meaning, are you trying to show us the proper commenting method? And is that why I'm looking at this file? Because this is, let's call this is your best work.
What's that?
I said, let's call it, this is your best work, right? So
this is what I would consider quality work. Yeah.
Okay. So what you're saying is, hey, we need to have essentially comments for every. I'm seeing almost every line item there, right? Almost.
Every line that does something non-obvious gets a comment. So, for example, this is just echoing a message to the console. It has variables that are clearly named: start date, end date. Okay, what those are, obviously.
Okay.
Retrieving calls from Twilio API. We know what echo does. Everyone knows what an echo does.
Yes.
So we don't have to comment this line.
Got it.
But this line, well, why am I doing string time 3 days and setting a variable? I don't know quite why I'm doing that. So we're setting a default start date. That's why I'm doing this.
To 3 days ago.
Here I'm getting the CLI parameters for the script because this script can take command line options to change its dates that it processes. So this is doing. The point is that anytime you're doing something that's not immediately and completely obvious, you want to comment on it.
Yeah.
So not every single line, but 80% of lines probably need a comment, something like that. Here we're loading a Twilio service to pull calls from Twilio. Now here, this would be a good example of code formatting. So this is a function call. So we have the object Twilio. A little arrow pointer here that says to go inside the Twilio object and run the method calls. Okay. So there's a function, a method inside the class called calls. And its parenthesis is here and then here. So this is what might seem a little confusing with formatting code, but what we do is, because we have a whole lot of parameters inside this, and we wanted to have some comments, we're breaking this out, which means that we take everything that would be inside here, we indent it a level. So we're coming in one level of indent. And then the closing parenthesis always goes on the same level as whatever line had the opening line. So because the opening parenthesis is here on this line is not indented at all, so this one won't be indented at all either. Got it. So then inside here, we're saying, okay, well, we have an array here with these square braces. And so that gets indented one level. Now, because we have multiple elements inside the array, we break those onto separate lines. And we could keep them on one line, but again, we want comments here. And there's a lot of stuff here. So rather than make it a gobbledygook line that you can't read, we're going to instead break them onto multiple lines and get indented one more time. Because we're going inside another logical nesting level.
So
Logically,
what I'm seeing here, the pattern that I'm seeing is anytime there's a bracket, meaning either it's a parenthesis bracket, it's curly bracket, or square bracket, doesn't matter. Don't write on that line. Do it on the next line. Well, that's not necessarily true.
Well, not always, but most of the
Yeah.
time. Here's an example of when you wouldn't.
Yeah,
On 48.
that's what I'm saying. That's
See,
not
I have
necessarily
a
true.
function,
Yeah,
and I'm taking a variable called equals, and then the array element called key.
yeah,
What I did here is to space this out because we have a variable inside brackets, and this is all documented out in our code standard. But we added some spaces here. But because the overall length of all this that's going on is very short, and because I have a long comment that explains what we're doing here, this doesn't really need to be broken out anymore. It's only one parameter to the function, so we can just leave it on one line. It's a little bit of a judgment call, but generally, if it's a long line, break it out. If it's a short line, you can keep it as one.
Then let me ask you this. So when I look at the previous calls above, meaning line number 31, so you had calls, and then you had Twilio calls, and then you had bracket parentheses right after the term calls, right before the comment.
Yes.
So why, in that case, for the line number 44 for each, you did not put the curly bracket right after the call?
Well, because this is okay. I understand what you're asking. Okay, so here's why. On 31, we're using a parenthesis, not a curly bracket.
Okay.
Right? So this is a parenthesis for a function call. PHP expects this to be the very next character after, because this is how it tells you're calling a function. So
it has to be the very next character. Got it. That's why.
Now, this being here is not required to be here. It could be up on this previous line.
Yes.
But by breaking it down here, what you can do is this interesting thing. A lot of these syntax highlighters, you can just hold your code if these are on separate lines.
Well, you can do the same thing on 31 as well, right?
Sometime on 30, yeah, you can, because it's able to detect it. Sublime's pretty good about that, so it's able to see. Okay, we just collapse all that, right? And in fact, it can see it on 32 as well. It understands the brackets there.
Correct.
Right? So again, some editors are better than others. What I found is that for a couple of reasons. One is the certain editors handle them better when they're on separate lines, if possible. And the second thing is that Git itself handles blocks of code with curly braces. If it sees the curly braces on separate lines, it's more likely to understand that it's a block of code you're working with, and so it's able to merge things a little bit better. That's sort of why we come to this standard. If that makes sense. So you'll see these curly braces always get their own line.
Okay. Curly braces always get their own lines. The arrays, the square brackets get their own line. If it's a function call, the parentheses stays on the same line.
Yes. Yeah. Function call always has to be the very next character. The parenthesis has to.
Got it.
Yep. And PHP requires that. In fact, if I were to put space here, some versions of PHP will error at that point.
Actually, I should know that. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
PHP will just be like, oh, well, so Twilio calls is just a variable then.
Yeah.
Is what they'll think. So we're bound by the language there, so we can't extract that out further. Anyway, so the point of what this script is doing is not that important. The point is to show the way in which we're trying to make it easy to read, right? So we're saying we're very clearly delineating logical levels. So like we immediately know as soon as we look at this that all of this code exists inside this for each loop. You barely have to look at it. You just see this, and you can scan down here. Okay, all of this is indented visually. I have my editor set.
Now, if you highlight that for each curly bracket, if you go in front of the curly bracket, in front of it, put the cursor
It'll
there.
show it there, right?
Is that what the underline is?
What's that?
Is that what the underline is?
Yeah, the underline indicates if it configured, and if you format it this way, it can usually figure it out, like 95% of the time, I would say. Some of our files are very badly formatted, so that the parsing engines cannot figure it out, and so you'll have a problem where it won't know which curly brace is the end of the section. So this is why we still need fallback for this kind of thing.
All right.
Anyway, so here I'm taking multiple little things here, like, I want to get the parent phone call of a particular phone call. Okay, so I have 2 lines of code, but because they're grouped together and they do something together, I have a little block of code talking about what we're doing with that. Getting a caller ID information from a service, right? So we have just a little block of code that tells us about this.
All right. So question on that.
Yep.
So again, I see that you're staying true to the indentation. So if you're in the for each loop, even though you're calling out a comment, you're staying on the same level as the other even else. That makes sense to me. Now,
Here's why.
the what?
Let's suppose I didn't.
That's right. So that. I just wanted to make sure that.
Now look at that. How do you tell what's what? It's harder.
Correct.
Whereas that's easier.
Yeah. So now, tell me this. What about why did you decide to use the commenting method instead of // you did the /**?
Okay, so the reason for that is ties back to other programming languages actually. So there are 2 different kinds of comments you can do. You can do the single line comment like these, right? And then you can do a block quote or a block comment, which is this, right? So the reason for the block comment is because it visually shows you something that's a little bit different. You could just as easily do this, and that's sort of okay. Personally, I find that this looks better. It's mostly a preference thing. There is one other reason to use this format, though, and I wanted to be consistent. This is what ultimately led to the choice. Let me open up a file that actually makes use of this. So one of the things we would like to do eventually is to automatically document. Let's see. Let's go in here. This must be super well commented. So one of the things we want to look at is you'll notice that this has not been fully commented yet because I'm still work in progress. It has some comments, has variable names that make sense, but one of the things that you'll see here is something like this. So here's a function that we've defined, and you'll notice this same commenting format again. Well, one of the things that you can do is if you put comments in this format and you define parameters and returns appropriately, then you can run software like PHPDoc, and it will create documentation from your code base automatically so that you'll know what functions you have. So then if you want to define, for example, a phone format function, let's say, then you would just open up the CSM documentation site, search for phone, and it would immediately return, says, okay, these are the phone formatting functions we have, and it would have descriptions of each one, and it would say, oh, well, here's one referenced in this file. There's one, sorry, not that one. It's in this file. It's this format right here. This function, what does it do? Well, if you run automatic documentation on it, it's going to pull these kind of things from the comments that are above the functions and above the classes. And so you would actually be able to just look in the documentation. It'll say, oh, format phone P164. And it would say, format's a phone number according to the ITSP or whatever it is, P164 standard, like this. And so you'll have a comment immediately in the documentation that you'll know what it does. And you'll say, that's the function I want to use. And you won't even have to go searching around code files for, well, I don't know where this function is. You know, there is one that we have that you can use it, but I don't know where it is. So if we have a means of generating documentation that will let it quickly access that, then we can avoid writing the same function 10 times. Why do we have 5 email out functions, let's say?
Got it.
Just need one, right? So the reason for keeping with this block format here is mostly consistency with that. So we only have exactly 2 ways that we comment. For a single line, you use the comment with that. And for anything that's bigger than 1 line that you want to comment, you always use the block format, and that's it.
So when you say, again, I just want to clarify, I'm not sure if my Monolith team is getting it at the same time. So what you're saying is the block comment is for multiple line you're trying to explain, and the single line is for that one line that you're trying to explain.
Yes, exactly. So this comment only describes this line and what it does. That's the only thing this comment does. But I might need to do more information, like for example here. I needed to get caller ID data from the OpenSea name service. And that involves two steps. The first is to load the OpenSea name service, which I did here. So I have a comment that I'm doing that, but that's not the only thing I'm doing. I have another command that's finding caller ID from the call.
Got it.
In total, they're both together. The task we were accomplishing is get caller ID data from OpenSea name. So we have a comment that tells us that's what we were trying to do. And the reason this will be useful, particularly, is because what you'll end up doing is you'll start writing, and I'm still work in progress here. But so, for example, inside this, for each block, I might start prototyping. I might start outlining what I want to do. So I might say, for example, go through each of the remaining calls, and I know I'm going to, at some point, create new database record. So that's going to be one thing. But before that, I'm going to have to check for existing database record. So these are now my main functional points. And so what I'll do is I'll outline functions in this way before I even start writing code. So what you end up doing is having bullet points of these are the tasks I have to accomplish.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. That's a good explanation. Now, question for you. Why did you put a space after on the second line on the star asterisk?
Oh, here? Oh, that's,
No, not that. Not that. Right there, that one.
Oh, so that it visually lines up. Otherwise, you could do it like this.
But what's preferred? Meaning, let's come up with a method and explain us why. Is it because visually it looks good? Is that the reason?
Well, it's visually it looks good. Also, the PHP doc, some of the documenter functions that are going to use these kind of code blocks actually do require this space here.
Okay.
So. Now, I have found, originally there were some of them that required you to have two spaces. So back when this code was originally written, they required you to have two spaces here. And sometimes they required more stars up here. But I found over time that the only ones that are being maintained actually don't require that, so I've simplified. So you only require two stars here to indicate the start of the block.
Got it.
And in fact, what you'll find is there's extensions for a lot of editors that automatically do this for you. How I just did that whenever, in fact, I think this came standard with Sublime. I don't think I've added an extension to this. So if I put /** and hit enter, it automatically does it for me. So it will automatically keep indenting for me, right? And then when I'm done, I just do that.
All right. Let's put a little pause for a second. So I'm going to ask Masoom some questions. Masoom, so I'm going to go ahead and download Sublime for myself, okay? What editor do you guys use right now?
Right now I am using Notepad++.
Okay.
Yep, that's a good one.
I mean, just to be consistent, because we're going to be training on this on a regular basis, so we're going to see it on Sublime. How hard is it for you to switch to Sublime?
Sublime will be better.
Can we make a decision today that Nawaz? Go ahead.
If I were still on Windows, I would still use Notepad++.
Oh, okay.
The only reason I switched to Sublime, I actually think Notepad++ is better.
Okay.
The only reason I use Sublime is because it doesn't load well on Linux, and so I made that sacrifice. Works well enough, but Notepad++ has similar things. I don't really care which editor people are using, as long as they can follow the standards. And you can find the exact same kind of auto-completion things for Notepad++.
Okay. Well, then we'll stick to Notepad++. So now let me ask another question to Masoom before we continue. So far, we talked about parentheses or the brackets and the comments. Do you have any questions on what he showed us so far? Let's not wait too long. Let's ask Nawaz, Nadeem, anybody.
So there might be questions. There might be, but you have asked so many questions to make those clear for us. So I think we are okay with those standards for now.
Okay, good. And we can keep going over this in the future. I just wanted to give you sort of a bigger picture of what it looks like when something is done well, so that you understand what it looks like. Because sometimes it's hard to understand how it all comes together as one big picture. So that's.
I think this has been a very good first lesson, I would say, for me at least, because if you look at any of my codes that I wrote, I had no idea what I was doing. I actually put everything in one line. Sometimes I put in a parenthesis in the next line. Sometimes I put it on the same line. Whatever I felt like it, because it worked.
Right. I would say one thing I would suggest is be on the lookout for opportunities to use structures like for each. They're really helpful, and sometimes we don't use them. A good example of that would be something like where's a good? I know exactly where a good example of that is. Let's see here. That's under config ink. Where's that that contact form filter script? The one that filters out spam things.
I think it's a validation, contact form.
Validation.
Form validation.
Form validation. Form validation. There it is. Okay, so this would be a great example. Now, what we're doing here, if you'll notice,
that looks like what I would do.
Right. So this is a good example. So take this whole section in here, right? So what we're doing is we're looping through and we're saying, is the set in the post comment field, and does this string exist in there? Well, if it does, then let's show a message. And I mean, honestly, I don't know that we necessarily need these messages exactly, but
I like to stick it to them. That's why.
What's that?
I like to stick it to them. That's why.
I figured. Anyway, so what happens is we run into these things that are nearly identical, and what we could do is we could create a for each loop. So the way you would do that is you would create an array of things you want to match, and then you would loop through the array. And so you just use for each to do that. You can trim the amount of code that's here substantially. We've seen that in a lot of the Jupyter modules.
Yes.
Form upload fields. If we have 6 upload fields, sometimes you'll see the same section of code pasted 6 times, right? And so what that ends up doing, then somebody will come along and they'll make a bug fix, let's say, and they'll say, well, we need to be able to upload a PDF. That's a good example. They'll say, we need to upload a PDF, and the person will modify form field 1 to be able to take a PDF. Problem solved, right? Except that then form fields 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 don't support PDFs for some reason. But if we just had a loop, we would just have that fixed all in one shot. So you'll notice that I tend to very much to use looping structures here as much as possible. Anything you can do to reduce the amount of code that you're writing is generally a good thing because it makes it a lot easier to maintain.
So, what's meaning in your opinion? I mean, if there's more than one item, I can use a for each loop, right? But what's if we say, hey, look, if you're gonna use this more than 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, what is that number in your head that if I'm gonna use it more than, or maybe it's more than once, I'm gonna use a for each loop? Is that the answer, more than once?
Well, so the question is it less code to do it this other way? That's really the question. So if you only had 2 of these in here, is it less code to do it? Well, it might be. It might be. The whole point of this is the amount of code that's easier to maintain.
Got it.
And other thing you have to think about is not just what is the code today, but what will it be in the future. So when you started, this file probably wasn't this big.
No, it wasn't. Right.
This big.
Yeah.
Let's say.
Yeah.
Right. And you added another one and another one and another one and another one and another one. Right?
Correct.
And you're just like, oh, I'll just tack one more on, no big deal. Right?
Yeah. Yep.
And now here we are with 40 lines of code, and the whole thing is 9.3 kilobytes just for filtering things out.
Got
and
it.
Not because anyone did bad, but because we just didn't think about filtering it ahead of time, and so we didn't.
Yeah, and at this point,
like,
And I would say at this point, it's easier to just go add another line like this than
Yes.
rewrite the whole thing. And so now we got to a point where it's like a point of no return. Now I can live with it, I can live without it, right? Kind of deal. So
Right. Right.
that's what we
So-
didn't
so the-
foresee.
So the result of that, though, unfortunately, is something like this, where we end up in something like in this file, leads.php, 119 kilobytes.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that this file ends up being so poorly structured at some points
Yes.
that you have no idea where you're doing or what's going on.
Dude, I have a hard time. The other day I was trying to do something. I have a hard time figuring out what I did. And so that's why I'm like, this is so important that this, I think everybody, we're learning it at the same time so that, I'm a very good case study of this could happen. And there's not a single line has a comment on it. I didn't even put if this, then do this. I didn't even put a comment on that side. I see like ending someone sending out email. That's impressive. I wrote a line of comment, but I haven't done that anywhere else.
But where's the start of sending an email to someone? Oh, you actually did. Well, that's the end of the send email.
Maybe somebody else hooked me up.
Oh, you did have a comment at the start at least, and at the end. Okay,
maybe somebody else did it for me.
Okay. But I guess what I'm getting at is nobody intended to make the file a mess. That wasn't the goal.
Yep.
But this is the reason that even on a small file like this is only 80 lines. It'll probably be 110 by 120 by the time I'm done with it, right?
Yeah.
But nonetheless, I'm meticulous about how it's formatted because I know that things end up getting bigger and bigger.
Well, plus we're gonna when I built it, Andy's new here, so Andy, when I built it for basement systems, I thought I was the only guy that's gonna work there for the rest of my life, so nobody else would have to touch it, right? So the minute you introduce other team members, so in this case now Masoom's working on my stuff, Jonathan's working on my stuff, it's not fair for them to go through this. But if I had to go figure it out, maybe I can, but it's not. So I like the structured method because Masoom may not be there for the rest of his life, but Nadim may not be there for the rest of his life. It could be somebody else. So I'm glad if we're going to build a software company, we need to start doing this. Get ready for we're going to be a huge company, and this is need to be structured a proper way. So that's why I'm going to spend more time with the Bangladesh team saying, no, let's come up with a standard. Let's follow that. And this way, every page we have, it follows the same standard going forward. And if we can, let's go back and fix our existing stuff slowly.
Right. And, this is one of those things, a good example of where that structure matters would be, we've been creating branches for tickets we've been working on, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things we do is we name the branch a certain way. Mm-hmm. So it's ticket dash whatever the number is, right? Simple. But why do it that way? Why does it matter? Why can't I just name my ticket based on whatever project I'm working on? Mm-hmm. Well, the reason for that is because whenever I give the ticket to Andy and say, hey, can you just go merge this and push this or whatever, now Andy does not have to ask me what's the branch name or what branch name does he need to create, all this stuff.
Right.
Because we've documented what we need in the ticket and because he knows that there's a certain structure to the way we build things, it doesn't matter anymore. I can just hand him the ticket and he knows how to with what we're doing automatically because it's all the same. We're working together instead of I work according to what's stored in my brain and you work according to what's stored in your brain and Andy's got his brain and it becomes a little bit harder to do it that way. But if we're all doing it the same way, then it's pretty easy. As Andy says, you can just refer to to get the answers that he
needs. Yep.
Because he knows the information and that's really helpful if you're trying to solve these problems. It's going to be really helpful. Another little thing I would point out, I see this a lot in our code.
Mm-hmm.
This.
Mm-hmm.
There's no reason for this.
Yeah.
Somebody just copy and pasted a chunk of code, probably this.
Yeah.
Said, "Oh, let me drop this in here. I need the same kind of drop down thing." They copied and pasted.
Hey, look, I had an indent on the next one. 2 indents. I want extra. The next line, 919.
Right. Yeah.
I hooked you up with a lot of indents.
Right. So with this, what I would have done here is I would have come down a line and indented because it's inside the TD.
Yeah,
is a line
yeah.
structure element. So inside there, I would have come down, going into PHP mode. I wouldn't have that, right? I might have a line break or something, and I'd have a block comment here and go show so let the customer choose if something, whatever, right? And I'm not going to save this obviously, but
Sure.
you would put a comment describing what this is for. I don't know what particular product. But anyway, we documented, right? We would just add our spaces around this, right? So it doesn't actually take long to do this, right? I can even do it while I'm talking to you guys. And queries, we would do something like that. We would do that, right? We put our proper syntax on this. We just fix these. It doesn't take long once you get used to it. But what ends up happening as a result is that it does take longer if you lose place of your cursor. Nope, that's not what I want. See, sometimes the code engine tries to autocomplete for you. So, like here, I'm trying to put a double quote in, and I'm going to hit it, and it's going to put 2 in.
Mm-hmm.
I have to watch because it sees 1 over here, so it thinks it needs an action. Anyway, not a big deal. But,
So let's talk about this a little bit because this is I saw that you talked to Masum and the team about this earlier. So talk to me a little bit about this sentence right here where you're putting in single quotation first instead of double quotation. What's the benefit?
Okay, so single quotation has a few benefits. The first thing is it's just a hair easier to read. Not a big deal, but it's a little bit.
Okay.
The second thing is it's a little bit faster to process because PHP doesn't have to try to interject certain character replacements, which it does on double quotes.
Is it because double quote requires more bytes to type in and then single quote?
No, it doesn't require more bytes, but it requires more processing time because it tries to do things like, for example, if I put $2 in here, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can do that in a double quote string. You can't do that in a single string. But frankly, you should never, ever do that inside a string. It's just bad form. So it doesn't matter that we can't do it in a single quote string. But PHP will try to process that in a double quote string. So we don't want to do that. It takes up extra
Well,
time.
technically in a query like this, I don't even need to put a single, when I'm talking about ID, you put in the tilde there,
okay.
right? You put a tilde.
The backticks, yes.
So now, when you do backtick, not tilde, I'm sorry. So when you do a backtick, do you do it every single time for any field that you're calling out on a database?
Yes.
Is that that's because
that's MySQL syntax? Yeah, MySQL syntax requires that. Now it will usually work if you don't have it.
Yes.
It'll usually figure it out, and you'll notice that because your queries usually do run without doing it.
It does. It's been running for a while now.
But even technically here, for example, we should technically be providing the name of the database we want to access, right? So this should technically be like that. Now, some of these things, then here's another problem. We have an SQL injection vulnerability right here. Because it takes as actual data to just drop in the query.
Correct.
I could actually go in and I could get our whole database content from this one little hole right here. So this is why we need that MySQL IEO escape string. Okay, so we need that. Or in the case of this is supposed to be an integer. It's an ID number. So we can
we can do what? Oh, integer. Got it.
Right, so we can int that. So we just need parentheses around there. So we can do it like so. We can force cast it to an integer, and then that would be safe, technically. But the point is that there's actually a number of problems here that we might fix. So that part of this is why I have this database engine that I've been building up for a while, so that you actually don't have to worry about something like that. Instead, it would look something like, if we wanted to do the same query, it would be something like, I'll just throw it in here. It would be something like, we would create a database resource, and it would be something like job manager. So we would do something like job equals job manager get first. We would say something like lead ID set to get ID soft delete false, or whatever it is, right? So this would do the same thing and get the whole job entry, right? Also, interestingly, if we wanted to update this job now, we would do something like
But you didn't mention which database you're getting that from. Is that because it's done on the job site?
as job manager would know, right? So job manager would be defined by selecting a database table. So you initialize the database with something like this.
Oh, I see. I see. I
So
see.
you eventually what you end up doing. In fact, this should be table. Yeah. Anyway, so you end up telling. There's a whole database access engine that I built that says get this table. Okay, build a smart data model by using that table, and so it automatically knows how to build a class out of it.
Okay.
So then all you do like this, you'll notice it's less code
Yeah.
to get to your record. And then if I want to make a change to the record, like they change a field called title, which just say job title equals foo, job save. And I've now written a new record into the database. I've updated my existing record, and I didn't even have to do anything hardly. I don't even have to write an update query. I just have an object that I can work with. And I can just make changes. I can save it. You even get into more advanced things, like you can say $company is my company, and you can say get all jobs if we set up the linking right, and jobs equals that. So we can say that all jobs tied to this company.
So essentially now that's my list of query that it shows everything on that whatever. And
You're right.
I'm assuming get all jobs in the bracket you can put in like a site ID. So this is why it's gonna get it
Well,
from.
it would be site. So if we assume that site is a site record we've already pulled up from the engine,
I see.
then we would just tell it how the two tables are linked together, right? And so as long as you have structure in place, it says, oh, I know that. Oh, okay, we've got a site record. We want to get all the jobs. Go get the jobs table, match on the site field. It knows to do that automatically,
Got
right?
it.
And so what I'm saying is that these kind of things, this database part is ready to use now. You can actually see it in main.php. In fact, I can open main.php and actually show you where we've been using it for a while now. And this part is ready to go. You can use it today. Home config inc. That's where I want to go. Main.php, our nice little 22 kilobyte file. Notice that what we did here is we said, hey, which is going to require a whole bunch of other includes.
I notice I don't have a comment on what the includes are.
Well, I assume that blog list.
I'm just giving you a hard time. I get
But
it.
on the other hand, no, you have a point that maybe we should have more comments on things. This is not a perfectly commented file, by the way.
Okay.
Like for example, for some reason I didn't add additional comments here.
Yep.
But so it's actually building up all those models, and so when we want to do something like here's a good example. Oh, we wanted to do some tracking stuff, so we did tracking stuff. Here we go. So we want to create site traffic source records and site traffic management records and so on in our existing database tables. So we just create a record with the engine. We set the value the way we want it. We set it to a replace mode, so it'll do a replace instead of an insert, and then we save.
Got it.
And so these end up becoming more secure and shorter to run.
Got it.
More logical sound. And then you can logically do things like you can split up and you can say, okay, I have a site traffic record up here that I've created. I've made some changes to it. But now, you ever have that problem where you want to build this database query and it becomes sort of unwieldy, so you're building little snippets of code that you have to kind of drop into a big database query? This short circuits that, so that you're not doing all this concatenation of long strings to try to make your query what you want. You just logically, you're working with an object. So that's just something that you can actually use now, and we can talk about that more later. So the last thing I was going to get to, sorry, I'm rabbit trailing here, is the reason for not double quoting is this. This line is a good example for not double quoting. So tell me which looks better to you. So I'm going to take the same line and I'm going to single quote it. Oh, look, we have a double quote in here because it's HTML, but I don't need a backslash on it anymore.
Oh, you don't need a backslash anymore because you're doing a single quote in the beginning.
That's right. So
Okay.
we don't need that anymore. Now this one doesn't look too bad, and it's even a little bit longer. But some of these get really long. And
They do,
with
yes.
Lots of slashes in there,
Mm-hmm.
and it just becomes sort of unwieldy. And the other problem you run into as well is whenever you start putting JavaScript inside there, so now double and triple escaping things.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got backslashes on backslashes on backslashes, and it becomes a
Clusterfuck.
nightmare. Yeah, it's really bad. I like that Google Meet censored you, right? I heard cluster. That's all I heard.
That's all I said. I don't know what you're talking about.
That's great. So that's just generally the idea there. We have about 10 minutes left in our hour. Do you want to go over that directory?
No. I think this has been a better. I'm glad you brought this up because, because in the programming meetings, I keep saying, hey, are they following the commenting process? Are they? So to me, now that I see it, just to recap from my side, okay, essentially, if you go back to that first file, the Twilio retrieve calls, that's a good example. So essentially, I would ask Masoom, Nadim, do they have access to this file?
Not yet, but they will today.
Okay, I think they should, and this way...
This is going to be finished today.
Okay, so this way I would say, hey, this is a good example of how we want it, and, I think I'm just going to summarize what you said. Hey, always write the comments out first, so this way... What are we going to do? It's like a index of table, right? Or table index or whatever the terminology.
You're planning what you're going to do before you do it.
Correct. And then, if you're writing 3 or 4 lines of code, so that means put a block comment. And if you're going to describe a single line, always put a single line comment. Now, the other thing that I took away from this meeting is the parentheses, or I should call it brackets because that falls under everything. Always try to space them out. I can see for each, you always put after a parentheses, you always put a space on it, which I've never done. When I say never, I've never done that. So that's something, it is much easier to read. And
that's the only reason it is to improve readability. That's the only reason.
Now, for each calls as key call, now, is that you're always the same naming convention, or if we're
not necessarily. So like for each loop by default, let's just go down here and add some stuff here. So if I have a collection of things, let's say that I have, let's go with our jobs, right?
Okay.
So let's say I told a list of jobs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Usually what you'll do is something like for each, I won't say jobs as job, right? So what we're doing is go through each job in the sets. That's what we're trying to do here, right?
Got it.
So we want to do, right? Now, in the case that I need to be able to index this and make a change to the original array, which is what I needed to do back up here, I had to access the calls array to unset some elements based on certain things. Mm-hmm. So I had to be able to modify the original array rather than just iterate through it. So because of that, I had to add the key thing, right? So the default syntax would be something like for each array as key and then value, right?
Correct.
And so that's kind of the thing you'll see quite often. And sometimes people will do something like v.
That's right.
That's sort of okay. For me, the variables that I tend to allow to not be named, I think every variable should be named smartly, except for counters, basically. So, for example, if you're going to use for I equals 0.
So that always should be I instead of changing it.
I plus plus, that's fine.
Yeah.
This is fine because I is just basically universally known as a counter.
Got it.
And we just basically use I by convention because that's what everyone and you can use I, J, K, so on that way. But if you're doing a key here, because K can sometimes, if you have like nested for loops, right? You'll
Yeah.
actually run into this, right? So you'll see this, and then you'll see this, and then you'll see this, right? And so what you'll end up seeing is something that looks a little bit like this, only instead of this you'll have J, J, J. Sometimes you run into these where you need to loop through multiple things recursively, right? Sorry, this would be K. Yep, K. Right? So because that can happen, I would assume that K is more likely to be a counter automatically. That's what my brain is going to assume. So because of that, I don't use single letters for just about anything. And I wouldn't use a generic like key either, or value normally. However, in the case of a short for each loop, I don't really care what variables you use as long as you use them only within the for each loop.
Okay.
So, but try to name things where you can. That's what I did up here, right? So I needed key as just a key for this index, for this array, just in this loop. Not a big deal to use key, right?
Got it.
Call, I'm working with calls. Singular of calls is call, so that's easy enough, right? So
Well, this is kind of important to understand because jobs. So that means it's a whole bunch of jobs, and
yes.
as job, one job that I'm going to talk about in this for each loop, right? So to me, that is a better way of doing it. As long as we're consistent, right? Yeah, there you go. So that particular job, for whatever reason, is to be saved.
So I would just do something like that.
Okay. All right. I think let's we got 4 more minutes. I really gotta go. Masoom, Joy, and Nadim, you guys have any questions?
No.
Okay. So did some of this stuff or all of it, this stuff, did that make sense to you guys?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
So,
partly the concepts are very clear. Now we have to get through the functions that JP wrote so that we can use those in our scripts.
okay.
Okay. That's fine. Yep.
So what I want to do is I want to make sure that, as we do code clinics, just like Jonathan gave his best work here, we're going to say, okay, Nadim, what file we're going to, just like, when I do a site clinic, what site are you guys working on, right? And what is the latest site? And why I say, look, show me the latest site, because I assume all the teachings that we've learned from the previous times is going to be on the latest sites, even though latest sites have a lot of issues, but that's okay. So same thing, we want to find holes and we want to do some clinics on them, and we can learn from those mistakes, right? So that's the objective. So, all right, I'm going to save this video and I'm going to send it to you guys, and I expect you guys to, if you guys have any questions, review this, because this has a lot of good information. And going forward, let's follow at least the basics, which is comments, indents, spaces. Let's start there. As we slowly learn into like this for each loops and things of that nature, we'll go into one at a time. So Jonathan, I want to let me just say